I thought I knew what marriage meant. I thought I knew what loyalty meant. I thought I knew what love looked like when it was tested. I was wrong. It started with a phone call, a simple phone call that should have been routine. My husband, Thomas, calling to let me know he'd be working late again. Another late night at the office. Another dinner alone. Another evening of checking the clock and wondering when this season of his career would finally ease up. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the way he said my name, too quickly, too casually, like he was already distracted by something else or someone else. I didn't say anything. I never do. That's the problem with being the good wife, the supportive wife, the wife who never makes waves. I just said, "Okay, honey, drive safe." And then I hung up. But I couldn't shake it. That feeling in my stomach. That quiet alarm that starts as a whisper and grows louder with every passing minute. So I did what I've never done before. I drove to his office. Not to confront him, not to accuse him, just to bring him dinner. To show him that even though he was working late, I was still thinking about him, still showing up, still being the wife I promised to be 23 years ago. The building was mostly dark when I arrived. Most of the offices were empty, but his light was on. I could see it from the parking lot, a small beacon in the sea of darkened windows. I took the elevator to the 6th floor, walked down the familiar hallway, past the framed company photos and the motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. His door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently, not wanting to startle him if he was on a call. But he wasn't on a call. He was standing by the window, his back to me, talking to someone. I could hear the other voice clearly, a man's voice, deep, confident, the kind of voice that carries authority. And that's when I realized I had her, Thomas was saying. Completely had her. She works herself to the bone for me, and she doesn't even question it anymore. The other man laughed. "You've trained her well, my friend." "Better than well," Thomas said. "She's like a well-oiled machine. Pays all the bills, manages the house, takes care of my mother, organizes my calendar, and never complains. She thinks she's being a good wife. She has no idea she's just being useful." I felt the air leave my lungs. My hand was still on the door handle, but my legs wouldn't move. My brain couldn't process what I was hearing. This was the man I had married. The man I had built a life with. The man I had given up my own career for so he could pursue his dreams while I kept everything else running smoothly. "And the best part," Thomas continued, "she has no idea about the money, no idea that I've been moving funds around, setting things up so that if anything ever happens to me, she gets nothing. Absolutely nothing. She'll be out on her ass, and she'll have deserved it for being so stupid." The other man whistled. "Cold, man, that's cold." "Survival of the fittest," Thomas said. "She should have been smarter, she should have seen what was happening, but she didn't, and now it's too late." I don't remember leaving the building. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember driving home. But somehow I found myself sitting in our driveway, the engine off, the keys in my lap, staring at the garage door. The garage door I had painted 2 summers ago. The one Thomas had supervised while checking his phone and offering suggestions about color choices. The same garage door that now felt like the entrance to prison I had built for myself. I sat there for what felt like hours. Maybe it was hours, maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. All I knew was that the man I had married, the man I had loved, the man I had given everything to, was bragging about owning me, about how he had manipulated me, about how he was planning to leave me with nothing. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, he was right. I had been stupid. I had been blind. I had been so focused on being the perfect wife, the perfect partner, that I had stopped being a person with my own needs and desires. I had stopped being Margaret. I had become Thomas's wife. And now I was sitting in the dark, realizing that the life I thought I had built was nothing more than an illusion, a carefully constructed fantasy that he had been planning to destroy all along. The next morning, I did something I never thought I would do. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I called Elaine Richardson, the toughest, most ruthless divorce attorney in the state, the one all the other lawyers were afraid of, the one who had a reputation for taking no prisoners and leaving no stone unturned. When I told her my situation, she didn't offer sympathy. She didn't offer comfort. She just asked one question. Do you have proof? I thought about Thomas's office, about the conversation I had overheard, about the casual way he had bragged about his plans. Yes, I said, I have proof. Good, Elaine said, because without proof, this is just your word against his, and in cases like this, his word will always win. I spent the next week gathering evidence, bank statements, credit card bills, emails, text messages, anything that could show the pattern of financial manipulation and deceit that had been happening right under my nose for years. It was like putting together a puzzle where all the pieces were designed to hurt me. Each document, each transaction, each piece of communication was another wound, another reminder of how thoroughly I had been deceived. But I kept going, because I had to. Because if I stopped, if I let myself feel the full weight of the betrayal, I would never be able to move forward. When I finally sat down with Elaine and laid everything out on her conference table, she didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked at the documents, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at me. You're going to need to be strong, she said. Stronger than you've ever been in your life, because what he's done isn't just cruel, it's illegal, and he's going to fight you every step of the way. I nodded. I understand. No, Elaine said. You don't understand. Not yet, but you will. The divorce proceedings started quietly enough. Thomas agreed to the divorce. He didn't fight it. He didn't argue. He just signed the papers and moved out of the house, heading to a condo downtown that I later discovered he had purchased 6 months earlier under a shell corporation. The first real battle was over money. Elaine had estimated that Thomas had siphoned off nearly $750,000 from our joint accounts over the past 5 years. Money that had been funneled into various business expenses, consulting fees, and investment opportunities that mysteriously never seemed to pan out. When confronted with the evidence, Thomas didn't deny it. He just shrugged and said, "It was for the business, for our future." Our future, I asked, my voice shaking. Our future where I get nothing, where you leave me with the debts and the bills and the responsibility for everything while you walk away with everything we built together. He looked at me then, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw him clearly. Not as my husband, not as my partner, but as what he truly was. A predator. You should have been smarter, he said, echoing the words I had overheard in his office. You should have paid attention. You should have protected yourself. And that's when I realized the full extent of his plan. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about leaving me with nothing. It was about making me feel like I deserved it. Like I had brought this on myself through my own ignorance and trust. Like I was the one who was wrong for believing in him, for supporting him, for loving him. The trial was brutal. Elaine had been right about that. Thomas's lawyers were aggressive and ruthless, attacking my character, my intelligence, my decisions. They painted me as a naive housewife who had no business managing money or making financial decisions. And the worst part, some of it was true. I had been naive. I had trusted him completely. I had believed that marriage meant partnership, meant shared responsibility, meant that we were in this together. But I had been wrong about what kind of partnership it was. Thomas had seen our marriage as a business arrangement, one where he was the CEO and I was the unpaid labor that kept everything running smoothly while he reaped all the benefits. The judge listened to both sides. He reviewed the evidence. He asked questions. And then he did something I never expected. He called a recess. Not just for a few hours, not just for a day. For 3 days. When we reconvened, the judge had a message for both of us. Mr. Caldwell, he said, addressing Thomas, the evidence presented in this case shows a pattern of financial abuse and manipulation that is both shocking and illegal. The transfers of funds, the creation of shell corporations, the deliberate exclusion of Mrs. Caldwell from financial decisions. These are not the actions of a partner. These are the actions of someone who has exploited a position of trust for personal gain. Thomas didn't react. He just sat there, his face impassive, as if he had expected this outcome all along. However, the judge continued, Mrs. Caldwell, while the court recognizes the severity of the abuse you have suffered, it also recognizes that you willingly participated in a financial arrangement that left you vulnerable. The court must consider whether awarding you a significant portion of the marital assets would be just, given that you had the opportunity to be more involved in financial decisions and chose not to be. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. All the evidence, all the documentation, all the pain and betrayal I had endured. And now the judge was suggesting that maybe I deserved what had happened to me. Elaine stood up. Your Honor, with all due respect, my client's lack of financial involvement was not a choice. It was a direct result of systematic isolation and manipulation by Mr. Caldwell. He deliberately kept her in the dark, made decisions without her knowledge or consent, and created an environment where questioning him was not an option. The judge nodded. I understand that argument, Ms. Richardson, and it is compelling. But the court must also consider the broader implications of this case. If we simply award Mrs. Caldwell a large settlement based solely on the fact that she was manipulated, are we not also sending a message that ignorance is a form of innocence? The courtroom was silent. I could hear my own breathing. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room on me. Then the judge spoke again. This court will take 3 days to deliberate. During that time, both parties are ordered to refrain from any communication with each other or with any witnesses in this case. Court is adjourned. 3 more days of waiting. 3 more days of wondering if the system that was supposed to protect me would instead blame me for my own victimization. When we returned to court, the judge had reached his decision. In the case of Caldwell versus Caldwell, he began, this court finds that while Mr. Caldwell's actions were indeed manipulative and financially abusive, Mrs. Caldwell's lack of financial involvement in the marriage cannot be entirely excused. However, the court also recognizes that this lack of involvement was the direct result of systematic manipulation and control. He paused, looking at both of us. Therefore, this court orders the following. Mr. Caldwell will pay Mrs. Caldwell a settlement of $500,000, representing approximately 60% of the funds that were improperly transferred from marital accounts. Additionally, Mr. Caldwell will be required to pay all court costs and Mrs. Caldwell's legal fees. Furthermore, Mr. Caldwell will be prohibited from making any disparaging statements about Mrs. Caldwell in public or private forums, and any violation of this order will result in immediate contempt of court charges. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even close to everything that had been taken from me, but it was something. It was recognition. It was justice of a sort. Thomas stood up. Your Honor, I object to this ruling. My wife. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, the judge said firmly. Your objections have been noted and overruled. This court is adjourned. As we left the courtroom, Elaine put her hand on my shoulder. You did good, Margaret. Better than good. You stood up for yourself. You fought back, and you won. But I didn't feel like I had won. I felt like I had survived, like I had endured something that had changed me forever. In the weeks that followed, I tried to put my life back together. I moved into a small apartment. I started seeing a therapist. I began to rebuild the parts of myself that had been lost in 23 years of marriage to a man who had seen me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. But the questions remained, the doubts, the what-ifs. What if I had been more involved in our finances? What if I had questioned his decisions? What if I had trusted my instincts instead of ignoring them? And the biggest question of all, what if I had never married him in the first place? I was sitting in my new apartment one evening, going through old photo albums, when I found something I had forgotten about. A small notebook. A journal I had kept in the early years of our marriage. As I flipped through the pages, I realized something shocking. I had documented everything, not just the good times, but the warning signs. The moments when Thomas had been controlling, manipulative, dismissive of my needs and desires. There were entries about the time he had criticized my career aspirations, telling me that my dreams were unrealistic and that I should focus on supporting his goals instead. There were entries about the time he had made financial decisions without consulting me, then gotten angry when I questioned him. There were entries about the time he had isolated me from friends and family, telling me that real couples didn't need anyone else. All of it was there. All of the evidence I needed to prove that this hadn't just happened, that it had been building for years, that I had seen the signs and ignored them because I wanted to believe in the fantasy of our marriage more than I wanted to face the reality of who he really was. I called Elaine the next day. I found something, I told her, something that might change everything. She came over immediately. When she saw the journal, her eyes widened. "This is exactly what we need," she said. "This shows a pattern. This shows intent. This shows that he planned this from the beginning." We took the journal to the authorities. We filed new charges. We reopened the case. And this time, Thomas couldn't hide behind his lawyers and his money and his manipulation. This time, the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. The second trial was different. This time, the focus wasn't just on the money. It was on the years of emotional abuse, the systematic isolation, the deliberate undermining of my confidence and autonomy. The prosecution presented the journal as evidence. They called character witnesses. They showed the pattern of behavior that had led to the financial abuse. And for the first time, people saw Thomas for what he really was. Not just a man who had made financial mistakes, not just a husband who had been thoughtless or selfish, but a predator who had deliberately targeted someone he saw as weak, someone he could control, someone he could exploit for his own gain. When the verdict came down, it was decisive. Thomas was found guilty of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and systematic isolation. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution for all the funds he had improperly transferred, plus additional damages for emotional distress. As I sat in the courtroom listening to the verdict, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, not relief, but something deeper. I felt like myself again, like Margaret, like a person who had value beyond what she could do for someone else, like someone who deserved respect, dignity, and justice. The judge looked at me before he left the bench. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "this court hopes that you will use this experience not just to rebuild your life, but to help others who might find themselves in similar situations. What happened to you should never happen to anyone else." I nodded. "I will, Your Honor, I promise I will." In the months that followed, I kept that promise. I started a support group for women who had experienced financial abuse in their marriages. I became an advocate for financial literacy and independence. I spoke at conferences and wrote articles about the warning signs of manipulation and control. And slowly, piece by piece, I rebuilt my life. Not as Thomas's wife, not as someone's partner, but as Margaret, as myself. The woman I had been all along, hidden beneath years of sacrifice and submission and self-doubt. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never overheard that conversation in Thomas's office, if I had never driven to his workplace that night, if I had never found the courage to stand up for myself. Would I still be married to him, still being exploited, still believing that I deserved the treatment I was receiving because I was too stupid or too trusting or too naive to see what was happening? I don't know, and I don't want to know. Because what matters is that I did overhear that conversation. I did drive to his office. I did find the courage to fight back. And in doing so, I reclaimed not just my money, not just my assets, but myself. My identity, my worth, my voice. The voice that had been silenced for 23 years. The voice that now speaks for others who are still trapped in situations like the one I escaped. The voice that says, "You are not alone, you are not stupid, you are not to blame. You are worthy of respect. You are worthy of justice. You are worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions or exploitation or manipulation. You are worthy of being seen as a person, not a resource." not a possession, not something to be owned. And that, more than any settlement or verdict or prison sentence, is the real victory. The victory of remembering who you are. The victory of becoming who you were always meant to be. The victory of Margaret. Not Thomas's wife. Just Margaret. And that is enough. It has always been enough. It will always be enough. The question now is not what Thomas did to me. The question is what I will do with the rest of my life. And that is a question I am finally free to answer for myself.